In 2018, Post Malone was beset by a series of unfortunate events. His private jet had to make an emergency landing after two tires on the landing gear had blown. His home that he had just recently vacated was broken into by two armed robbers, and his white Rolls Royce, while he was in it, was T-boned and totaled. Luckily, there were no injuries associated with any of these events. I mean, including the car accident, everybody walked away okay. But many were left speculating why his luck had become so bad. And a good many of people, particularly online, traced it all back to one moment in 2018 where Post Malone, visiting Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, became incredibly close, indirectly touching even what many consider the most haunted object in the world, the Dybbuk Box. A Dybbuk box is really just any container, usually wooden, that is said to contain the spirit of a Dybbuk within it. A Dybbuk is a human spirit which, for some reason, maybe the wickedness in their past life or unfinished business, has been unable to move on to the afterlife. And when that spirit is left on earth as a Dybbuk or a Dybbuk, they are able to possess other people. Now, Dybbuk literally means to cling, right? So because a Dybbuk is able to latch onto somebody else's person, they can cling on to them. The process for possession by a Dybbuk can vary depending on who you talk to and what the source is, but typically Dybbuks are described as male, and most victims of Dybbuk possession are female. And the characteristics of Dybbuk possession can be bouts of mania, depressive episodes, anxiety. These are oftentimes explained as possession by a Dybbuk. And the way to exorcise a Dybbuk is to invite a group of rabbis over, and they would typically engage in conversations with the Dybbuk in order to loosen its hold on the individual. This could be relaying the past crimes of the Dybbuk if the individual is determined. Sometimes it might result in a battle of the wits where the rabbis have to trick the Dybbuk to leave the body. But usually the process might involve saying a prayer or reciting Psalm 91, which speaks of the protection of God to those who dwell within him. And that might be enough to loosen this Dybbuk's grip, where the rabbis can then guide the Dybbuk through the individual's body and hopefully push the Dybbuk to exit the individual through the space between their nail on the big toe and their big toe, because a Dybbuk's exit can be violent at times and cause a lot of issues. That's the safest place for a Dybbuk to leave. There aren't that many stories in history of Dybbuks possessing more than just an individual, very rarely. I really can't think of any prior to the 20th century of any Dybbuk possessing an inanimate object. Usually Dybbuks only possess other people for the goal of rectifying wrongs or completing their business. But Dybbuks are almost always malicious and almost always cause problems for the person they're possessing. The Dybbuk box that Post Malone came into contact with is not just any Dybbuk box, it is the Dybbuk box. Of all the Dybbuk boxes that currently are said to exist in the world today, this is, as far as I can tell, the first one that has ever been at least brought to any sort of attention to a mass group of people. And the story that follows it is probably the most interesting story accompanying any Dybbuk box out there. The story of the Dybbuk box really begins in 2001 when a man named Kevin Mannis visited Portland, Oregon. Now, the series of events that we're about to discuss relating to the Dybbuk box up until the eventual procurement of the box by a couple of college students is all stated and related to an audience in an eBay listing. In 2001, Kevin Mannis goes to Portland, Oregon, and while there, he visits an estate sale. And it's at this estate sale that he comes across an antique wine cabinet. And so he finds the operator of the estate sale, and he begins asking her some questions about it. And she calls it the Dybbuk Box. She begins to tell him the entire story, which begins in Poland with a young woman named Havila, who is this other woman's grandmother. And Havila, while in Poland during the early years of World War II, is captured along with the rest of her family by the Germans. Havila manages to escape, but the rest of her family is unable to, and she flees to Spain. From Spain, she comes to the United States, but it's during her time in Spain that Havila procures this box. Mannis isn't told much more beyond that. All the granddaughter tells him is that when she was younger, the box was not permitted to be opened, and that her grandmother told her that it contains a spirit, an evil spirit, called a Dybbuk. Now, Mannis tries to not purchase the box to return it, but the young woman will not let him. She has allowed Mannis to take on the burden of the box. Mannis doesn't think much of it and takes it home, finding it interesting enough. Mannis brings the box home and puts it in his shop, and without thinking much of it, leaves the shop for a while with an employee there, and he very quickly receives a distress call from that same employee. Apparently, somebody has broken into the shop, and she's hearing loud swearing and glass shattering, and she is hiding from this intruder and needs help immediately. So Mannis rushes over there and finds that all of the doors are still locked and that there are no windows broken. He can't find anybody in the shop, and his employee is hiding in his office, crying uncontrollably. She will never return to the shop again. During his investigation, Mannis finds that lights have shattered. Eventually, Mannis gets around to finally refurbishing the box, taking care of it, and he chooses to open it up. Inside of the box, Mannis finds 2 wheat pennies, one from 1925 and one from 1928, a lock of brown or black hair, dark-colored hair, and in some sources it says that there's a lock of dark hair and a lock of blonde hair. Some of them say just a lock of blonde hair, but the eBay listing that Mannis originally posted regarding the Dybbuk Box makes it sound a lot like it was only one lock of hair and it was brown or very dark. A small granite statue or altar that has the word Shalom imprinted on it, 1 dried rosebud, a golden wine cup, and a cast iron candlestick holder with octopus legs coming out of it. Now, the contents of the box are very interesting to me. Mannis doesn't do a whole lot of exploration with it, and there really isn't a whole lot of conversation regarding the things inside of the actual box. But I think they could add a lot of interesting details to the story. For example, both of the wheat pennies are from the 1920s, which is older than this box is. The box, if Havila made it in Spain, would be from at least the 1940s. So we're predating the box here, and I suppose the pennies could have ended up in Spain during World War I, or maybe leftovers from World War II activity. I'm also trying to think of ways that the pennies could have been used by Havila to lock this individual in the box. Maybe because it's money, it's representative of the crimes or sins of the Dybbuk in their human life. Perhaps greed was the ultimate sin of theirs, and that's what caused them to be stuck here on Earth. And so pennies were locked into the box with the Dybbuk to entice it to stay there. The lock of hair could possibly belong to the human of the Dybbuk, But in my opinion, the lock of hair is much more symbolic than that. The Dybbuk has to possess someone, and it's hard to think of a physical human artifact that's more intimate than a lock of hair. Usually, especially in older times, you don't really see it a whole lot today, but locks of hairs are given to represent, a strong connection or love. It carries a lot of attachment with it. So to me, just as the Dybbuk attaches itself to someone else, maybe this hair helped contain the spirit, right? Maybe it's the hair of somebody who was possessed, so it has an element of the Dybbuk within them, and the Dybbuk clinging to the hair of this person is stuck into the box, or the hair having a strong feeling of attachment, and the Dybbuk actually being attached to something shows a lot of mixture of symbolism, but I think it's a really interesting thing to include in the box. The granite statue is also interesting, but it's very fitting for the box. The Dybbuk is a Jewish spirit, and shalom is Hebrew for peace. It's often used as a greeting or a farewell in Jewish communities, but ultimately it does mean peace. And when containing an evil spirit, it makes sense to have, something in there to hopefully help contain it. I'm not really sure what the addition of the dried rosebud could mean. I assume it's linked to herbs being used to maybe contain spirits and whatnot. Typically what you see being used is sage and rosemary being the predominant ones, but rosebud is not the same. So maybe there's some confusion there from Havilah inside the box. Maybe she meant to put rosemary in it, or perhaps the rosebud was just the best thing available. The golden wine cup is really interesting to me because when I first saw it, I thought that it was a Kiddush cup. A Kiddush cup is a ceremonial cup used for blessings during holidays and Shabbat or Sabbath. And oftentimes you would pour wine or grape juice in it and, say a quick blessing for the day and for the celebration to kind of give thanks and to bring some good tidings. A lot of families that use Kiddush cups will have ones that have been passed down from a few generations back or even longer, and they're usually decorated and ornate and contain blessings on them. Now, in the Dybbuk box, the Kiddush cup is pretty bland. I didn't see any mention of engraving on it or anything like that, and in all the photographs, which are somewhere, it seems to be just a cup. The Mannis describes it as golden, but it looks a little bit more like bronzish. I think it's really interesting how that's included in there, because there's a high degree of spirituality associated with it. If I'm containing a malicious evil spirit, I'm probably including whatever I can to make sure that it stays quelled. And so yeah, maybe I'll toss in the ceremonial blessing cup. The last item in the box is something that I really, really struggled to find an explanation for, which is the octopus-themed candlestick holder. Now, candles in Judaism really don't need much explanation. They're used a lot. There are a lot of candles used for virtually every holiday, every Sabbath. A candle is burned in many Jewish households. And so there's this very strong connection in the faith between the individual and the spirit of an individual and the candle, right? So that makes sense. I understand why the candlestick is in there. What doesn't make any sense to me is the octopus theme, because octopus is not kosher. It is not at all allowed to be eaten, and so maybe its inclusion is just because it's what was available, or maybe it's a warning for the person looking into the box, like, hey, the contents within this box are not okay, not good, leave them alone, don't touch. So maybe it's a warning sign, or perhaps it's just the best that Havilah had. But those are all the contents inside of the Dybbuk box. There's not a whole lot of explanation going into why they're in there, but I think it's fun being able to speculate. But anyways, after cleaning it out and not really doing a whole lot, Mannis thought the box was fine, kind of rubbed some lemon oil on it. He thought that it would make the perfect gift for his mother, which, makes sense to me because if I ever find a box that I've been told is haunted and is full of weird, semi-creepy things, I too would want to give that to the woman who raised me. I think it's an appropriate gift. It's during this cleaning that Manus discovers a carving on the back of the box, which he doesn't describe in the eBay listing because he claims to not know what it says, but it is a Shema prayer. The Shema is a declaration of faith and belief in the oneness of God. It's a very important prayer in Judaism. And so that's carved on the back of the box. Manus again doesn't think much of it and gives it to his mother. And he decides to leave her alone with the box. And he comes back a short while later, and his mother is unresponsive. She's sitting there emotionless, not moving. He's calling her name, she's not answering him. And there are tears just streaming down her face. An ambulance is called, and it's revealed that she has suffered a stroke and subsequently has lost the ability to speak. In the ensuing days, despite her struggle to communicate, Manus' mother, Ida, makes it very clear that she does not like the gift, spelling out hate gift. A wonderful thing for a son to hear, I'm sure. But, I would get it because if I was given a gift and immediately after messing with it, I almost died, I probably wouldn't like that gift too much either. Manus, again displaying his incredible deductive reasoning skills, assumes that his mother is simply telling him that she does not care for the cabinet. And so he says, okay, that's fine, and decides to give it to his sister, who has it for about a week, and then returns it because the doors will not stay shut. They are only opening. And Manus makes mention that there are no springs in the doors. He then gives it to his brother and his sister-in-law, and they have it for a short while. They return it after finding that it had some unsettling scents. Manus's brother claims that the box smells like jasmine, whereas his sister-in-law smells only cat urine, which Mannis mentions his shop smelled like when he visited it the night of the phone call from his employee. Mannis has this box and decides to give it to his girlfriend. She returns it and just tells him to sell it, like she doesn't want it either. Mannis manages to find a couple to sell the box to, and he thinks that it's off his hands and not his problem anymore. But he walks into his shop a few days later and finds the box sitting there on the counter for him with a note that reads, "This has a bad darkness." It's here in the eBay listing that Mannis reveals he's been having a recurring nightmare ever since he brought the box into his home. It begins with him walking along with a friend or an individual that he's very close with, trusts a lot. And he turns to look at this person and look into their eyes. And what he sees looking back at him is not the friend that he knows, but rather something sinister. Upon this realization, the person he's with begins to transform, and they go from being this familiar face into becoming a quote, demonic, gruesome-looking hag. He continues that the hag begins to, quote, beat the living tar out of him. Perfect wording there for the subject matter. During the beating, he wakes up, and on his body he finds actual bruises and marks from where this demonic looking hag has really let him have it. As it turns out, Mannis was not the only one having these dreams, and his sister, brother, sister-in-law, and girlfriend all confirm that they have had the exact same dream. And so now Mannis is really starting to think a little bit more about the impact of this box. As Mannis begins looking for alternatives of storing or getting rid of this box, he begins seeing shadowy figures in his peripheral that he can't quite catch with his eyes, but he feels that they're there watching him. And it's not just Mannis with these experiences. Once again, other people in his home are also seeing these shadowy figures in their peripheral. When they turn their head, the figure just disappears. Mannis describes one time where he saw a figure in this peripheral, and as he turned to look, he watched it disappear on the corner of a hallway. He tries keeping the box outside in a storage shed, but the fire alarm in the shed starts going off despite there being no fire, and Mannis finds both the shed and his home reek of cat urine. Mannis decides the best way to get rid of the box is to sell it, because that's what you do when you have this sort of thing. Yeah, don't go talk to any sort of expert on this scenario. No. Some idiot on eBay will buy it. He puts it online, and what we've been reading this entire time is that eBay listing. So we've essentially caught up to him in the story. As Mannis waits for the eBay auction to end, so we can finally offload this box, there are a couple of students in northern Missouri who have grown a little interested in it. Joseph and Brian. Now, Joseph finds the box incredibly interesting, and his curiosity gets the better of him. Brian describes walking into the apartment one day and just seeing this box sitting there on the counter. And they begin bringing it with them to parties because, at the very least, it's an incredibly good conversation piece. And, I mean, as somebody who was a guy in college, yeah, if I had a haunted box like that, I would also show people. So that's what they do. But things start to become more and more difficult. For starters, their electronics all begin to fail. So like their toaster's not working, their computer's not working, their microwave isn't working, and that's really the start of their problems. The box also begins to attract bugs. Like a lot of bugs. Their apartment, which was, about as clean as one could expect it to be, and was moderately bug-free, becomes littered with all kinds of bugs. Cockroaches, beetles, ants, everything. And they all seem to have some sort of weird draw to this particular box. Joseph, the buyer of the box, is initially pretty reluctant to sell it, but he begins noticing that his hair is falling out of his head. He decides that the best course of action, just like Mannis did, is to sell this box. And during their time with the box, Joseph thinks it's a good idea to start blogging his experience, talking about the things that he's witnessing and seeing and what's going on around him. The next buyer of the box, Jason Haxton, a local university museum curator, buys it as soon as he can. The effects for Haxton are pretty immediate. He begins having nightmares of a multitude of women with gashed faces, and would often wake up with bloodshot eyes and feelings of being poked in the eye repeatedly. He begins experiencing coughing fits, and him, as well as his family, including his children, begin seeing shadowy figures in their peripheral. There's one instance where his son begins crying from fright because of this strange, shadowy spirit that his son can see in the corner of the room. Haxton himself becomes more and more physically ill as he holds onto the box. In one instance, he tries to take a ritually cleansing bath, and he becomes incredibly sick and begins puking a weird gelatinous mucus substance. So rather than mostly liquid with maybe chunks of food, it sounds more like he was puking a semi-solid, which I don't know if that sounds painful or not. I mean, I think that might hurt. Paxton becomes pretty convinced that he needs to talk to somebody about this box. So the first person he calls is Mannis. Mannis, still intrigued with the box and much more convinced of its authority, travels to Portland to meet with the granddaughter and ask more questions. He meets Sophie. Sophie is the elderly cousin of Havilah. And Sophie reveals to Mannis that when she and Havilah were much younger, they held seances with a Ouija board and tried communicating with spirits. And one of the spirits they came across was this Dybbuk, who tried to haunt them and possess these young girls. They used their combined might to force the Dybbuk into the cabinet that has now passed through a multitude of hands and ended up in Haxton's. Haxton, gaining a little bit more information about this box, contacts some rabbis who help him learn how to seal it correctly by enlisting the help of the Amish to build him a ark that's kind of echoing the Ark of the Covenant that God instructed Moses to build. So they use acacia wood and they say a lot of prayers around it. And the goal is that this is going to hold in the Dybbuk's spirit. Essentially, it works because the Dybbuk box lays dormant for some time until Haxton eventually sells the box to Zach Baggins, who has the Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, and who Post Malone visited with on the show Ghost Adventures, and now we've come full circle. Now, of everybody connected to the box, Haxton probably has benefited the most from it. In 2012, there was a Sam Raimi produced movie called The Possession. It is directly based off the Dybbuk Box story with a lot of liberties, but, still. And Haxton is the one who sold the story, and Haxton also releases a book to coincide with the release of the film called The Dybbuk Box, which did pretty well. So Haxton has had the most financial gain, especially compared to Mannis and Joseph, right? Haxton's benefited the most. And there's a chance that it did not sit very well with Mannis. And as the years have gone by and Haxton's gained some limelight from the box, Mannis has continued, up to a certain point to grow the story of the Dybbuk Box. For starters, Mannis begins building a claim that there's actually 10 original real Dybbuk boxes that Havilah and Sophie used to trap spirits, and that he has a couple of them, Baggins has 2, and that ultimately 2 of them are still unaccounted for and missing, and that each box connects to a different node on the Kabbalistic tree of life. But it does cause a lot of confusion and questioning from people looking into this story. Mannis even goes on to claim that a lot of the evils of the 20th century are the result of the spirits that Havilah and Sophie have released into the world. Blame these 2 Jewish women from Poland for much of the issues that we face today. The Dybbuk Box story captured the minds of a lot of people. For a long time, it was held up as kind of a definitive piece of haunted culture, right? But there are a variety of people who had skepticism and problems with it. For starters, Dybbuk's, up until Mannis' story, Dybbuk's have never possessed anything other than people. And if you were to ask, a real strong Kabbalistic scholar or rabbi about it, he would probably tell you that it's a lot of junk, because Dybbuk's can't possess an inanimate object. There's also the fact that despite all of the bad luck that Post Malone experienced in 2018, the year was also a pretty successful one for him. He broke Michael Jackson's 34-year-old record for most weeks at #1 on the Billboard's hip-hop/R&B charts. His album Beer Bongs and Bentleys broke the first day Spotify streaming records and was certified platinum for only 4 days. That's a pretty successful year. And it's not discounting the bad luck, but again, nobody was injured in any of these instances. In fact, one could argue it was pretty lucky. When the plane's landing gear had 2 blown tires, they were still able to land safely with no injuries. The armed robbers robbed his home right after he had vacated it. So that seems pretty lucky to me. I mean, generally, as unlucky as an armed robbery is, I'd rather it be in a house that I no longer lived in, for sure. And in his car accident, which is pretty serious, getting T-boned, everybody was able to walk away with pretty minor injuries. So, an unlucky year, or a year full of good luck, really? There's a lot of skepticism regarding the Dybbuk Box, and Haxton expresses this in his book. I mean, Haxton goes so far as to suggest that Mannis was probably making it all up, but that he believes the box holds a lot of real power. And Haxton has also claimed that he views the box more as a blessing now than the curse that it once was. The real kicker is in 2021, Charles Moss from Input Magazine, over the course of many days, Church gets into contact with Mannis and begins really trying to get to the bottom of this box. It's revealed that Mannis was lying. From the get-go, his intention was to create an interesting story. And I think he was successful. And it's a very, very, very successful story. Today you can go online and find Dybbuk boxes for sale everywhere. There was a craze on YouTube for a long time of people opening up Dybbuk boxes. And, I mean, you can credit all that with Mannis. As far as I know, and as much as Mannis claims, there's no one who had the idea for a Dybbuk box before him. And it's become kind of a staple in certain realms of horror communities online. I think it's really, really cool what he did, though some people will probably feel that he was full of deceit the entire time. Mannis really wasn't the one in main control of the box for much of its history anyway. I mean, he sold that box pretty early, and the box has been in a museum for quite a long time now. I mean, almost a decade. I don't know how involved really is Mannis in this whole ordeal. Mannis also reveals in the interview that he told not only Joseph, but also Haxton, that the story was made up, that he let them know ahead of time. He said, hey, this is a fake story with the intention of telling a compelling tale. And both of them rolled along with it. And again, Haxton seems to genuinely believe in the power of the box. But I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to argue that it really is a powerful entity inside of it when there's a pretty compelling argument that that's not true. The Dybbuk Box for 20 years was one of the most interesting and compelling haunted pieces, at least in the United States. And its influence is certainly been seen and felt. I mean, there's been a multitude of movies made. The Possession's not the only one. Ultimately, the belief in these items is up to the individual. I think that a majority of time you will find what you are looking for. Thank you for watching. Bye.